2 weeks ago, I asked, what produces wealth? Today I ask you, what is wealth? Is money wealth? Is accumulation of capital wealth? Are consumer goods wealth? Or is wealth something entirely different, such as time spent with people you love? Is it healthy, delicious food from local farmers? Is wealth the ability to live in peace and be happy? The next 3 weeks we'll explore different aspects of the rural economy, which, in its broadest term, is concerned with creating wealth. Before we do that, we need to define what we mean by economy. The dominant definition confines the economy to domains in which the utility of scarce resources is to be maximized through rational decision-making. This view of the economy, also called the neoclassical or formalist view, presupposes that humans act rationally to maximize their self-interest, which certainly is not universal to human behavior. Economic historian Karl Polanyi offered a more inclusive definition, describing the economy as man's interchange with his natural and social environment, insofar as this results in supplying him with the material means of one's satisfaction. Similarly, anthropologist Rhoda Halperin defines the economy as the instituted process through which humans in society interact with nature to supply the material means of livelihood. This means that the economy is not a single institution, but that it may be organized by many institutional arrangements: kinship, religious, political, magical. The market is only one such arrangement. This definition is known as the substantive view of economy, which we can summarize as the material means provisioning process. As sociologists interested in social life in all its manifestations, this substantive definition serves us well. When we construe the economy broadly as society's material means provisioning process, we find that many activities can be considered economic. When we construe the economy broadly as society's material means provisioning process, we find that many activities can be considered economic. The labor a mother exerts when she prepares sandwiches for her children is as economic as an auto factory. But also institutions that we don't usually consider part of the economy can have an economic component. When people marry, they don't just vow loyalty for the rest of their life, they also pledge to support each other economically. With marriage also often comes a redistribution of wealth, such as when friends and families stock a newlywed couple's household with gifts from the registry. The substantive view of the economy also indicates that few activities are purely economic, and often serve social and cultural purposes as well. When it's finals week and you go to the grocery store, you don't just fill your fridge. You also appreciate seeing human faces, and the checkout conversation with the cashier might satisfy your minimum requirement for daily social interaction. The food you take home does not just fill your belly, it also reaffirms who you are, since presumably the food you buy aligns with your identity. If economy in the substantive sense describes how a society satisfies its material needs, we need to ask whose needs are being met, and what these needs are. If economy in the substantive sense describes how a society satisfies its material needs, we need to ask whose needs are being met, and what these needs are. Society conflates a range of different people with different interests, and the economy does not serve all people equally well. Last week, I mentioned the wealth gap in US society, with 70% of the wealth owned by 10% of the population. At the same time, over 35 million people in the United States live below the poverty line, at which they are said to be no longer able to meet all their basic needs. About the same amount of people is considered food insecure, which the USDA defines as lack of consistent access to enough food for an active, healthy life. Clearly, the economy does not provide for everyone equally well. In their book, The Subsistence Perspective Beyond the Globalized Economy, sociologists Veronica Bernhold-Thompson and Maria Mies argue that we should focus on the satisfaction of people's everyday needs, both in the ways we study economy and the way we act. They advocate the term subsistence to describe these basic needs, which not only include the material conditions for survival, but also the things that satisfy our cultural and social needs. They reject that subsistence means drudgery, but rather describe it as diverse abundance in which all of our needs, not just our material ones, are met. They ask us, what is it that we really need, and what can we do without? They nudge us to envision fulfilling lifestyles that are possible and sustainable for all of humanity. In short, like I asked you in the beginning of this lecture, Bernhold-Thompson and Mies ask us to define what constitutes human wealth. Certainly, they ask us not to conflate subsistence or wealth with money, which by itself does not satisfy anything. We certainly can't eat it. Because subsistence describes the material basis of life, it is essential to any society, but that doesn't mean that it is the goal of all economies. Consider Benholt-Thompson and Mee's juxtaposition of subsistence and commodity production, the latter being what we described last week as the capitalist mode of production. The authors write, subsistence production or production of life includes all work that is expended in the creation, recreation and maintenance of immediate life and which has no other purpose. Subsistence production stands in contrast to commodity or surplus value production. For subsistence production, the aim is life. For commodity production, it is money, which produces ever more money, or the accumulation of capital. For this mode of production, life is only, so to speak, a coincidental side effect. From that vantage point, the authors argue that the capitalist economy is not only inept in providing subsistence to the majority of humanity, but that it depends on people filling the needs that capitalism cannot satisfy. Because if people cannot subsist, there's no one to do the work that needs to be done. As a result, within the cracks of the formal capitalist economy, there are pockets of subsistence production that we need to pay attention to. Oftentimes, the subsistence production is organized after principles that have nothing to do with the propositions of conventional economic wisdom. Instead of being self-interest, subsistence production is usually directed at the needs of others. It is often reciprocal rather than conditional. Domestic household work is a prime example. Across the world, it is mainly women who cook for their families and who look after their children, the elderly and the sick. And while they expect that their needs are met too, they don't charge for each sandwich they prepare or track the hours for their household work. Or consider a well that freely provides clean drinking water for anyone who walks by. We can find such pockets of subsistence production almost everywhere. And although we are taught to disregard subsistence as economically irrelevant, it constitutes the foundation of the substantive economy. Indeed, other forms of economic activity such as stock market trading or accumulation of capital would be impossible without. Veronica Benholt-Thompson and Mies describe the capitalist economy as an iceberg. At the top, there is the formal economy, which is measured in official statistics, such as the GNP or the official employment statistics. But beneath the surface, there are layers and layers of informal and invisible economic activities that not only support the formal economy, but that are essential to human life. First, there's informal, unregulated labor. This includes the neighbor's kids who mows the lawn, undocumented workers picking fruit, sex work, forced labor, and other forms of informal labor. But below this layer, there's yet another layer of economic activity without which the iceberg would collapse: the domestic household work, most often conducted by women. This includes activities such as food preparation, care work, cleaning, organizing community events and festivals, and much more. In many countries of the world, peasant farming also contributes to a community's subsistence. These forms of labor are necessary both for the capitalist economy and our survival, but they are not the foundation of the iceberg. At its base, there are the various colonies of the capitalist economy, including nature. Only by exploiting cheap labor in overseas factories and by exploiting nature, the capitalist economy is able to accumulate ever more capital and create cheap mass consumer goods that give us the impression that capitalism provides for us. So, when we are looking at the rural economy in the next weeks of the class, or when you describe the economy in your community profile, pay attention to the entire substantive economy, including the layers below the surface of the formal economy. If we are set to describe the economy of a community or society, looking at the economic iceberg from the base to its tip would be sufficient. But if we want to understand social change, we must describe how different forms of economy relate to each other. Benholt-Thompson and Mies show capitalist development dominates subsistence production. For most of history, subsistence production has been the dominant mode of production. People acted within their communities to recreate the life they deemed worth living. It was only with the onset of capitalism that profit became a dominant motive. As we learned last week, the first things capitalists needed to do to accumulate capital was to separate workers from their means of subsistence. As Benholt-Thompson and Mies write, only after people's capacity to subsist is destroyed are they totally and unconditionally in the power of capital. We get to know this process as primitive accumulation. That said, capitalism did not demolish all spheres of subsistence, either because people resisted or because capitalists and the state do not know how to satisfy certain essential human needs. For example, the fact that infants are generally raised in families and not in some kind of centralized nursery is testament to this. The subsistence perspective originates from a school of thought known as ecofeminism. This branch of feminism claims that the domination of women and the exploitation of nature are two sides of patriarchy. Many ecofeminists see women as close to nature, because both nature and women give life unconditionally. They see this connection as a source of strength and pride. Silvia Federici argued that misogynist violence such as the witch hunts were an attempt of men to destroy the autonomy of women who celebrated their connection with nature and the power that flows from it. In the ecofeminist view, women and nature create life, whereas patriarchal capitalism takes it. Ecofeminism has been criticized for its essentialist outlook on women and nature, that is, assigning definite characteristics to women and nature, rather than seeing them as categories that are fluid and socially constructed. But regardless of this philosophical question, it is predominantly women, both in the global north and the global south, who are doing subsistence work, and who are often at the forefront of movements that resist ongoing primitive accumulation. And it is an achievement of the women's movement that we recognize the importance of informal work to the well-being of the overall society. To summarize, in this lecture I introduce you to Polanyi's substantive definition of the economy, which describes economy as material means provisioning. This view goes beyond neoclassical economics, which confine economy to activities that can be counted and that follow an idealized logic of rational decision-making and utility maximization. Essential to the economy as viewed from a substantive standpoint is subsistence work, which produces the material, cultural and social essentials of our life. In our capitalist society, subsistence labor is hedged so that common people are unable to live autonomous lives and are dependent on the capitalists for their survival. But subsistence work is also appropriated so that workers can keep going to work and produce a surplus value for the capital owners. Bernard Thompson and Mies regard subsistence as a source of abundance and joyfulness, rather than equating it with drudgery. They argue that an economy directed at subsistence, rather than surplus value, would be more apt to meet the actual needs of human society. I close the lecture with a quotation from Bernard Thompson and Mies' book, which summarizes the relationship between capitalism and subsistence, but also hints at the possibility of a life beyond capitalism. Without subsistence production, no commodity production, the author is right. But without commodity production, definitely subsistence production.